Hello. The title of this lecture is The Free Marketers. Keynesians and other economists who centered their policies on the spending habits of consumers dominated the thinking of most American economists since World War II. Viewing government involvement as wise and essential, Keynesians supported higher government spending. Injecting money in the economy sounded good, but free marketers argued that there were serious flaws to a big government approach. One notable anti-Keynesian opponent was the Austrian School of Economics led by Austrians Ludwig von Mises, born in 1881 and died in 1973, and Friedrich Hayek, born in 1899 and died in 1992. As a result of their libertarianism, the Austrian economists were especially anti-government. Mises' uncompromising rejection of government intervention resulted in him being ignored by most academic historians. Although on the periphery of academia, books such as Hayek's The Road to Serfdom and Mises' Human Action opened the eyes to many to the problems of a planned economy. Extolling the virtues of capitalism, the Austrians trusted the free market system to be far superior to a planned economy, notably how the market allocates society's limited resources in an efficient manner. In Austrian economics, entrepreneurship is central. Business people are to be alert to new opportunities for innovative goods and production that may or may not be successful. When people exercise poor judgment in the market, they were to take responsibility. The Austrians believed that this emphasis on accountability encouraged people to conduct business as intelligently as possible. There was a common sense attractiveness to Austrian ideas for those distrustful of economic and governmental experts. Contrast to mainstream economic thinking, the Austrians argued that goods did not have any inherent value in themselves. They are valued because they help to satisfy some human want or need. Individuals bought and sold from each other because each person sought to maximize their satisfaction by exchanging what they value less for what they value more. In this way, the satisfaction of all is increased. The Austrians embrace methodological individualism. That is, they focused on individual actions, preferences, and initiatives. It made little sense to Austrian economists to adopt complicated algebraic equations or formulas to simulate the conditions needed to realize market equilibrium. Their focus was on the market process because consumers, quote, are constantly learning, changing tastes, and demanding new products to meet new wants. The Austrian suspicion of quantitative economics was a barrier for greater economic status, but this could be advantageous in gaining recruits put off by mathematical jargon. Thus, the Austrians tended to be right in a way that did not bring in all kinds of economic language and jargon. Also championing the free market message was a mission accepted enthusiastically by Milton Friedman. Monetarists, such as Friedman, focus on the role of money in causing inflation and cyclical disturbances. Increased quantity of money, such as printing of money, led to inflation followed by stagnation, economic stagnation. A recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics, Friedman made his mark while teaching economics at the University of Chicago. As an integral member of the Chicago School of Economics, he presented specific data and arguments against government intervention. The New Republic, a left-wing journal, saw Friedman as a hyperactive extremist of the right. But the prize-winning economist made his mark both in academic circles and with mainstream America. There were numerous writings published in Newsweek and his influential public broadcasting service, Free to Choose. This was a television series that aired in the year 1980. Thus, he had he published in Newsweek. He had this weekly, bi-monthly. Every 2 weeks he had an article in the Newsweek, but also he had this television show in 1980. So he was reaching a broader audience than just those in academic circles. Now, complementing the series that I refer to, this television series referred as the Free to Choose, was the very popular book of the same name, Free to Choose, A Personal Statement. And this book was written by both Milton and his wife, Rose. The impact of the television series and the book was far-ranging, capping almost 2 decades of growing influence on economic issues. So he had a significant impact, again, beyond just academic circles. In Free to Choose, the Friedmans covered much ground beyond monetarism. They gave engaging accounts of the power of the market, the downside of regulations, the shortcomings of the cradle-to-grave model, and the pressing issues of inflation, race, education, and consumer and worker protection. For the Friedmans, regulations and controls represented tyranny since they restricted economic freedom and freedom of speech, press, and religion. Governments and unions exerted power in the academic community by way of government grants. And then in media circles, you have union politics. And in religious schools, government controls. Vital for the Friedmans was the promotion of material prosperity and human freedom, both of which relied on the other. Simply put, competitive capitalism and political freedom went hand in hand. The Friedmans embraced Adam Smith's insight. Exchange between two parties where there is no coercion or violation of freedom will only occur if each side benefits, and that people who pursue their own interests will provide benefits to society in general, even if it was not their intention to do so, which is often the case. As the Friedman saw it, the genius of Smith was the convincing manner he defied the notion of a zero-sum model that said one party's gain was another party's loss. The beneficial results of a free market system working best with voluntary transactions rather than central control offered a stark contrast to a command system expected to successfully coordinate the activity of millions of transitions in an economy in the hope of making everyone better off. And when he's referring to the command economy, he's referring to like a socialist economy where it's very top heavy, where you have the experts who are attempting to intervene and manipulate and control all the various actions within an economy. Free to Choose argued that only the price system provided essential transmission of information for an economy to be healthy. Government interference often led to disappointing results nationally and internationally. The Friedman stated that the well-intentioned programs of the welfare state were a flop. And rather than mistakes of execution, the root problem was the use of bad means to achieve good objectives. The Friedmans rejected liberals' arguments that stated government programs failed because they were not large enough, that more money from Congress was the solution. They totally disagreed with that position. The Friedmans pointed out that public housing was an obvious failure, citing examples of housing deterioration due to less incentive to maintain and improve such buildings. Evidence showed relief rolls continuing to grow even as prosperity grew, and that once on relief, people had less reason to earn an income. And there was the general inefficiency and lack of accountability in the burgeoning bureaucracy pertaining to other components of the welfare state, such as Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. When government bureaucrats spent someone else's money on someone else, there was no self-interest motivation to ensure the effective use of money in a way beneficial to recipients, that is, to the population, to the people, the citizens. Assisting those in economic need was a noble objective, but the Friedman saw paternalistic programs resulting in fraud, abuse, and waste. Too much of government money went to a burgeoning bureaucracy rather than to the poor. Even more serious was the major issue of government programs tearing the fabric of American society. They weakened the family, reduced the incentive to work, to save, and innovate. They lessened the accumulation of capital, and they limited freedom. It was a serious matter when government paternalism weaken the basic building block of society, which the Friedmans identified as the family, and many others too would identify this as the building block of society. Whereas critics of capitalism saw vulgar materialism, the Friedmans quoted early 19th century Tocqueville and wrote of the enormous release of human energy in America and the rise of productivity and wealth finding expression in nonprofit hospitals, private colleges, charitable organizations, to mention only a few. Yes, there were losers in the business world, perhaps more losers than winners, but win or lose, society as a whole benefited from their willingness to take a chance. There were gross inequities of income and wealth everywhere in the world, yet, quote, nowhere are the rich richer and the poor poorer than in those societies that do not permit the free market to operate, end of quote. Denouncing the small privileged class of party officials and bureaucrats of the Soviet Union and China, the Friedmans argued that an emphasis on equality rather than on liberty leads to unfavorable results, since freedom releases the energies and abilities of people. Promoted by big government and almost an article of religious faith for intellectuals, the push for equality of outcome caused greater inequality. Fair shares for all sounds attractive, but who decided what is fair? Are we not in George Orwell's Animal Farm, the Friedmans wrote, where all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others? Moreover, where do the prizes come from if fairness rather than work determine what people got? The Friedmans claimed that the quality of products produced by or connected to the government offered a shoddy product and poor service to consumers. In the larger picture, they were critical of big business that welcomed government protection from the full rigors of competition. Second, they argued that the various movements and government agencies seeking to protect the environment were simply anti-growth, and thus this hurt those Americans who were typically less financially secure than the activists. Third, excessive government regulations were more harmful than beneficial, mainly because regulations stifle important and even life-saving development without necessarily preventing accidents. Also, accountability was an important issue, since a serious blunder by a private firm might mean that the business failed, whereas a government agency likely received a larger budget. The Friedmans had little trust in labor unions protecting the workers. They argued that the interests of a labor union often are not the interests of its members, that any gains made for union members came primarily at the cost of other workers, and that all workers, union and non-union, paid more for consumer goods when high union wages drove up prices. Even minimum wage laws demanded by labor unions hurt low-income workers because they decreased the number of jobs. Young people, for example, lost the opportunity to have lower wage jobs where they could gain valuable on-the-job training. All in all, the best protection for most workers was a growing free market economy and the existence of many employers who competed for the services of workers. Competitive capitalism meant higher productivity and good paying employment, all accomplished at nobody's expense, according to the Friedmans. Free to Choose held that the United States had to face the consequences of big government. Bureaucrats did not deliberately engage in a conspiracy to subvert democracy, but they did gain much power, affecting every detail of the relation between the individual and government. In fact, government legislation had, at the time that in the recent years of when the Friedmans had wrote their book in 1980, shared much with the Socialist Party economic platform of 1928. So they were comparing some government legislation in the 1970s and saying that it shared common ground with even what the socialists were arguing back in 1928. The Friedmans, however, concluded on a hopeful note. Quote, "We are again recognizing the dangers of an over-governed society, coming to understand that good objectives can be perverted by bad means, that reliance on the freedom of people to control their own lives in accordance with their own values is the surest way to achieve the full potential of a great society." End of quote. The Friedman's strong criticism of Keynesianism and government intervention and their championing of freedom attracted much support. But it was not enough for the supply side proponents who had no faith in the philosophy of monetarist solutions. Studying the ills of American economic life, amateur economist Jude Wanniski found answers in modern-day version of Jean-Baptiste Say and Leon Walras, two economists from the 19th century. Also, influenced by the economist Arthur Laffer, professor of business and finance at the University of Southern California, and Robert Mundell of Columbia University, who actually went on to win a Nobel Prize in economics in the year 1999. The self-taught economists, again, influenced by these two economists, the self-taught economist Wanniski promoted supply-side economics, which challenged conventional wisdom concerning government revenues. The orthodoxy held it was wise for the government to tax the people amply to pay for the modern welfare state. Only irresponsible demagogues promoted tax cuts. Wanniski responded with an important book. Published in 1978, The Way the World Works promoted tax reduction policies on the understanding that high taxation became counterproductive and caused economic malaise. Thus, higher taxes really led a society to economic stagnation. Wanniski argued that the electorate is wiser than any individual, and the key task of a politician is to divine what it is the electorate wants. In fact, great political ideas are the ones the electorate craves first before the politicians come on board. One idea that is a driving force among the electorate is an economic system that promises maximum capital and greater benefits for all. As Wanniski saw it, the best chance for increased productivity was when government reduced regulation, taxation, tariffs, and welfare benefits. Wanniski's criticism of Keynesianism was that politicians ignored its original purpose of temporarily boosting the economy during times of distress and employed it primarily to rationalize their income distributionist programs. So getting back to what they were doing is that historians, the economists were to inject money the economists would want to see the politicians to inject money into the system, whether it be printing money in times of economic difficulty, to prime the pump, to boost the economy, to get it going. But what Wanniski observed was that the politicians were continuing to do this. It was not just something temporary when the economy was bad, but they were continuing to print money, and he believes that they did so to rationalize their income redistribution programs, where they would redistribute programs and money across the board. Quote, liberals who at one time viewed the Keynesian magic as an antidote to Marxist impulse are attracted more and more to collectivist notions, and that is central planning, detailed regulation of commerce, wage and price controls. End of quote. The centerpiece behind the economic philosophy of the way the world works is the Laffer Curve, named after Arthur Laffer. The curve provided a simple illustration that there are always two tax rates that yield the same revenues. And let me explain that. Production ceased when the tax rate was 100%. I mean, think about it. Workers will do no work if the government takes all their earnings. And a tax rate of 0% resulted in zero government revenues. So both 100% and 0% tax rates yield the same revenue. If the government lowered its tax rates to figures some less than 100%, production increased marginally, as did government revenue, And so what you have here is very high tax rate and a very low production. Government revenue also increased marginally when the government raises taxes to a figure something more than 0%, and this is where you would have a very low tax rate and very high production. In both cases, the amount of government revenue collected is the same. Adopting this model, Wanniski and the other supply-siders saw the point in which the electorate desires to be taxed. So just finding that perfect spot on the graph which could bring the most government revenue, and also this process would be for the most part supported by the people. The point Wanniski and the supply-siders expressed was that tax rates in the prohibitive range were counterproductive. It made more economic sense to cut taxes, to lower tax rates to ensure greater productivity and thus more government revenue. Wanniski quoted the philosopher David Hume. David Hume's observation in 1756 was, quote, "Exorbitant taxes, like extreme necessity, destroy industry by producing despair." One problem in the 20th century was that high tax rates resulted in lower government revenues since more people bartered or introduced do-it-yourself work to escape the tax burden. In the late 1970s, economists recognized a large and growing underground economy somewhere in the range of 10 to 25% of the gross national product. And again, if the taxes are so high, there is less incentive for productivity. Viewing unemployment and inflation as separate problems that could be solved simultaneously, Wanniski and other supply-siders were confident that they had a better model to fight stagflation. Stagflation, again, meaning high inflation and also a stagnant economy. Given that there was no consumer per se in a supply-side approach, but instead producers and traders, one only had to focus on policies that removed obstacles of production and trade. So, obstacles to production and trade, I should say. On the issue of money, supply-side concern was for the quality rather than the quantity of money. A gold standard, Wanniski argued, offered the most reliable standard of value. And predictability meant less currency risk for those considering long-term contracts. In conclusion, supply-side economics was more or less classical economics in modern garb. It was really classical thinking, but in a more modern form. Historian George Nash writes, "If Wanniski was the most ardent propagandist for supply-side economics, writer George Gilder has been called its theologian. Propelling capitalism onto the higher plane of metaphysics, George Gilder and his book Wealth and Poverty, quote, was an ode to entrepreneurship as marvelously creative, basically altruistic, and veritably moral, end of quote. George Gilder himself viewed his book as following the pioneering trail of Wanniski, whose inspiring work offered something more superior than many professional economists. In this vein, Gilder identified the so-called war against the rich in the world's wealthiest country by the small but influential establishment class, and he challenged the myth of wealth causing poverty. And this is what his response. I'll read it, quote, the direct quote. It is far more true to say that what causes poverty is widespread belief that wealth does. In other words, he's coming against the argument that wealth created poverty. He argued the very opposite. Wealth actually lowered poverty. Another complaint was the tendency of professional economists to exaggerate the scientific rigor of economics and to dismiss the important theme of altruistic creativity within capitalism. Gilder lamented the faint praise generally for free enterprise, even as the socialist model appeared in large part intellectually bankrupt and morally defunct. This is something that he observed at the time of writing his book in the late 1970s. And we'll see that within a decade that there's a clear example of how the command society, the socialist economic model, was in big trouble. There was no surprise when professed socialists like John Kenneth Galbraith and Robert Heilbronner saw the creation of wealth in terms of hedonistic consumerism and destructive tendencies. But it was curious when well-known conservatives were slow to present a resounding defense of capitalism. Although the Chicago School of Economics, particularly Milton Friedman, and the Austrian School of Economics, notably Friedrich Hayek and Ludwig von Mises, although they offered formidable criticism of collectivism by celebrating liberty, missing was a clear argument for, quote, the heroic creativity of entrepreneurs. This is a message one finds numerous places in George Gilder's work. For promoters of free enterprise, there remained a major obstacle: the belief that the good fortune of others will benefit others does not come easily to the human breast, end of quote. Whereas some could not advance their thinking beyond the perennial inequalities and a framework of redistribution founded on the flawed notion of a zero-sum model that said wealth creates poverty. Gilder's book, Wealth and Poverty, argued for a celebration of a golden rule of economics, something Adam Smith understood. Even before Adam Smith's Wealth, The Wealth of Nation, David Hume wrote, quote, "I shall therefore venture to acknowledge that not only as a man, but as a British subject, I pray for the flourishing commerce of Germany, Spain, Italy, and even France itself. I am at least certain that all nations would flourish more with such enlarged and benevolent sympathies towards each other. As a nation became more prosperous by way of free trade, the standard of living of all social classes rose. Economic prosperity was the best hope for the poor. But other economists took different lessons from history. Economists who focus on the modern technological shortcomings of large, mature corporations missed the real industrial revolution of hundreds of lesser-known companies forging ahead with technological advances and spurring impressive job creation and productivity. Still, according to George Gilder, the numbers should have been even better, except that a steep progressive rate of taxation meant that the rich were less likely to risk money in business and instead withdrew their money from productive enterprises, or they bought gold, or they sought tax shelters, or they invested elsewhere. Gilder claimed that there was too much media attention on the hedonistic displays of the flamboyant rich, and forgotten was that most of the rich provided unencumbered and unbureaucratized cash. They did this for production and employment. Simply put, by risking their wealth and promoting untested ideas, the rich saved the economy. The Laffer Curve made sense to Gilder. Lower tax rates meant that the rich invested and earned more, and in absolute amounts, they paid more taxes, thus easing the tax burden of the non-rich in sustaining a given level of government services. In his attack of Keynesianism, Gilder argued that demand can never exist in a very definite way and remain unidentifiable. The question is, though, how does one measure the elusive notion of what people are willing and able to buy? Moreover, since there was no demand for unknown goods or unforeseen creations of innovations, any fixation on demand fostered stagnation. The demand side economic models were moribund. Supply, on the other hand, was measurable with specific sums. Embracing Say's law, that's spelled S-A-Y apostrophe S, embracing Say's law that supply created its own demand, Gilder believed there was always enough wealth in any economy to buy its products. It was essential for enterprising people to take risk, grow industries, and produce, understanding that there will always be a demand for goods. In the 1970s, inflation was not the fundamental problem of the American economy, according to Gilder. The trouble was collapsing productivity. Expanding and promoting new opportunities was the supply name of the game, rather than propping up weak businesses such as the failing automobile industries, or companies, I should say. And there were companies that were clearly suffering in the 1970s. Wealth and poverty, the book Wealth and Poverty, was very critical of government waste, a consequence of government departments seeking and spending the most generous budget possible, of unhealthy government decisions such as bailouts or failed businesses, and the government's preoccupation on distribution and regulatory control rather than on creating wealth. George Gilder and other supplies people, the focus was to be on wealth creation, to look at that process and to point to the innovation and the creativity of business. It was futile for the government to attempt to have a positive impact on demand by taking money from some, by way of taxes, and giving it to others. And this would be, the welfare and employment checks. Such shifting of wealth was a zero-sum game, and the net effect of incomes was usually zero or worse. Non-productive government spending reduced rather than spurred demand. Welfare handouts, an increasing number of public service jobs, and the high taxation of profitable enterprises to pay for government spending excuse me. Okay, let me try that again. Welfare handouts, an increasing number of the public service jobs, and the high taxation of profitable enterprises to pay for government spending all deterred productive work and perpetuated poverty. Government jobs themselves were inefficient because bureaucrat managers or supervisors, lacking the willpower of a marine drill instructor and knowing that it makes no difference whether the jobs are done or not, could not find it in their hearts to be hard-nosed when it was necessary. Gilder pointed out that moral weakness was not necessarily the reason why the poor chose leisure. Many did so because the government paid them to do so. The best approach to escape poverty was work, family, and faith. Gilder argued that the typical liberal bureaucrat was unrealistic to expect that poor youth starting out in the working world required attractive jobs with promising promotions and benefits. Yes, occupational mobility usually was a long process, but when the government intervened in the lives of the poor, the results of upward mobility were worse. That is, according to Gilder. For example, government programs and welfare subsidies that exceeded prevailing wages led to workforce withdrawal and also made more families dependent and fatherless. The latter because government benefits to women destroyed the father's key role and authority in the family. Having welfare assist those with dire and temporary problems was good. Treating temporary problems as if they were permanent ones was destructive. By attempting to domesticate the inevitable unknown, the welfare state, with all its planning, ultimately violated the spirit of capitalism and its openness to face and experiment. To move forward on the issue of poverty, Gilder explained, America needed to rely on its greatest resource, the miracle of human creativity in a relation of openness to the divine. Clearly, capitalism was a better formula than socialistic thinking. As Gilder explained, socialism offered a type of insurance policy and static system that shielded people from risk. But it also denied many of the benefits of a multiplicity of gifts and experiments, which would unfold when you had a competitive economy. Capitalism was the only proper system for a world in which all certainty was sham and its rules were faith, altruism, investment, competition, and bureaucracy. Although there were no guarantees, and 2/3 of new businesses did fail within 5 years, the process expressed, quote, an impulse in faith, a belief in the freedom, and a sensitivity to the needs of others, even if unstated. So again, these are the words of George Gilder. Now, just to conclude, in the 1970s and 1980s, there was an increasing number of free marketers who voiced their critique of big government. They were critical of Keynesianism and socialism. The Austrian School of Economics, Milton Friedman, and the supply thinking of Jude, Wanniski, and George Gilder offered credible alternatives to the Keynesian thinking that dominated politics since World War II. Okay, so my final point here, the big picture was, here we have Keynesianism, Keynesian economics that had dominated since World War II, but by the 1970s, there's an increase in voices that were arguing against Keynesianism. They were seeing what was happening to the economy, looking at the standard of living, and they believed a better approach was to take the free market approach. But at the same time, one had to care for those who genuinely were in need. thus we get the rise of free marketers, and they didn't always agree. Certainly, the Austrian School of Economics took a little bit of a different approach than the Chicago School of Economics, which being Milton Friedman, the key guy there, who represented that monetarism. And then you have the supply thinkers, economists, Jude Wanniski, George Gilder, Arthur Laffer, and others. They were coming in with a different approach to Keynesianism, but they all were on the same page in that they saw Keynesianism as a problem that if not checked, if not solved, there would be a lowering of the standard of living for the people. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.